Hi there. My name is Nicole Tatman. I'm originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I grew up on the west side of Albuquerque and I spent a lot of my time growing up outdoors. I was really interested in catching all of the lizards that were outside of my house. I would keep them in a little terrarium for a couple of days and just watch them. Um, and and my father often took myself and my siblings camping in the Jemez Mountains, and we'd go out there. And I think it was mostly a reason for him to go fishing, but in the process, we got to have some fun adventures outside camping. My siblings and I remember one time we got into this huge mud fight where we were slinging mud at one another. It was the boys versus the girls, and I really don't know who won ultimately, but we sure had a good time for several hours getting dirty in some really stinky mud. Our parents made us get in the cold river to wash ourselves off after that. But those experiences and the love for being outside really instilled in me an appreciation for the outdoors and the wildlife that lives in them. So I think that living in a different place, I wouldn't have had those experiences. I remember I caught what is called a horned lizard. It's a horny toad, so it's like it looks kind of like a toad, but it's actually a lizard. Anyway, this lizard's defense mechanism, I later learned when I was an adult, is to squirt blood out of its eyeball. And so I caught this lizard and I put it in my terrarium to watch for a couple of days. I was feeding it ants, and went to sleep the first night. The next night I woke up, or the next day I woke up and found this lizard had blood leaking out of its eyes, and I was just mortified that I had harmed this lizard and that it was not going to live. And so I immediately released it and um, went back inside feeling very, very bad. But later learned that actually this lizard did exactly what it needed to do to get out of my control and went back into the wild, and I'm sure did fine catching bugs from then on out. Right now, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I work as the big game program manager for New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. So essentially, my job is to be a wildlife biologist. So I quantify wildlife populations and make recommendations on how to best manage them. So being in high school, I was always fascinated with the outdoors and just science and I guess biology most specifically. So I recall a situation in high school biology class where it was our task to dissect a jellyfish. And I remember thinking initially it was gross and it kind of looked like boogers on a little plate. But once I started to look at it more closely, I was just fascinated that this was a living animal at one point and it was entirely clear. Like I could see through the jellyfish. And that just blew my mind that you could see through a living creature. And so that really sparked my interest a little more in biology and wildlife in general. Additionally, some courses that sort of helped me along the way have been definitely math courses. Really, any and every math course that I take helps me in both my professional and personal life pretty much on a daily basis. So I recall being really nervous about math and I felt like I wasn't very good at it. But I did have a teacher that really encouraged me to, just keep at it and keep doing my homework. And I actually learned in that algebra class that I was not that bad at it at all. And I took some additional classes in math at her suggestion and went on to actually get a minor in statistics that's helped me in my professional degree or professional career, I should say. A typical day for me can be sort of put into two categories. So I have both times I work in an office, like at a desk setting, like here, or times when I work in the field collecting data on wildlife populations. So a typical day in the office is generally yesterday I was helping plan a project to identify migration routes for deer and elk species in northern New Mexico. And so these species move from high elevations in the summertime, like high mountains. When snow starts to fall in the autumn, they move down to lower elevations. But in the mean, while they're doing this, they cross a lot of private land, they may cross tribal land, they cross a lot of roads. And so without identifying where these animals are moving, we can't really best manage to conserve those migration routes and make sure that species is present on the landscape into the future. So yesterday, my day was planning this project. So it includes organizing a helicopter capture, where we go out and capture these animals and put a collar on them and let them go. And this collar will talk to us on our computers and let us know where those animals are. So that was my day yesterday, sort of the ins and outs of planning a project like that. There's a lot of logistics. So it's a lot of phone calls and organizing people and groups to come together all at once to do this, looking at the data and talking with partners to see if there's anything perhaps we could do now to maybe modify some fences along roadways to make it easier for wildlife to pass, for example. A typical fieldwork day is a little bit different. I'll wake up very early in the morning, usually before the sunrise, and sometimes put on what's called a flight suit. I'll put on a helicopter helmet and get into a helicopter and survey wildlife populations, an elk population, for example. And so when we're surveying an elk population, we're counting all of the elk that we see. So, and we're classifying them in terms of the adult females that we see, how many of those, the adult males, and then the juveniles. And all of this information then goes into a computer program that allows us to estimate an entire wildlife population. And by estimating an entire wildlife population size, we're able to make some recommendations on how to best manage it. Perhaps there are too many elk. We might want to harvest a few more of them. Or maybe there are too few elk and we should back off on how many that we're harvesting. So we're using math and science together in this regard to come up with some on the ground directions and projects that we can do to best manage these wildlife populations into the future. So after high school, I went to college at New Mexico State University. I got the lottery scholarship, which paid for tuition for the time that I was there, which was really great because college, as most people know, is not inexpensive. So studying at New Mexico State University, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do for a career. And so I talked to a lot of professors. I knew I was interested in animals and wildlife and the outdoors, but I thought I wanted to be a zookeeper. I didn't fully know what a wildlife biologist was. And so I was just talking to all of the professors there because obviously they were in that career, they knew more than I did. And in the process, I would ask them, if they had any projects that I could help work on, anything at all. Really, I was interested in doing anything because I sort of wanted a full-time or a part-time job as well. But in the process of talking to them, I got introduced to a few professors in the wildlife department. And at the time I was studying just straight biology. So those were two different departments. But in the wildlife department, these professors did take me on some of their fieldwork excursions. So I got to trap prairie dogs, for example. I got to look through the scat of mountain lions and jaguars for a year, which scat is poop. But this project was to identify what those animals were eating. And while it may not sound like a very interesting project to a lot of people, it was fascinating to me because you got to see what these jaguars in Mexico were eating, which was just amazing. They were eating everything from turtles to javelina, which looked like a small pig, but they're not exactly a pig. They were eating deer. Sometimes they were eating cattle. And in one case, there was a male jaguar that had eaten a kitten of its own species. It may not have been its own young, but that's something that happens in big cat populations, and it's not uncommon, but it's not uncommon to be known, but it is uncommon to find. So that was a pretty interesting experience for me. So those experiences as an undergraduate sort of shaped my interest in moving forward. I took a handful of statistics classes as an undergraduate, and because of my interest in working within the wildlife department, I was encouraged to go to graduate school. And in graduate school, I was tasked with taking on a project all on my own, which was a very daunting task at first. And in addition, you're supposed to take a lot of classes in science and plant ID and math and statistics, which I was always nervous about math and statistics, but I was forced to do it because I was interested in this field. Um, and so in taking on this project on my own, I was studying a deer population in Arizona and then an elk population in New Mexico. But the success of those projects was due to my own efforts, right? I didn't have anybody telling me that I absolutely had to do this. I could quit at any time. But knowing that I was helping to understand what was going on with that wildlife population was really valuable to me. And learning these statistics to go from the data that we collect to ultimately what are the patterns that we're seeing in this population, and is it meaningful or is it just one animal does something weird. Taking it and making it valid to an entire population is a big jump, and statistics and math is a really important piece of that. But it's actually the key piece, because if we just made one observation of one elk in time, we would have really no idea what the whole population is doing. Where do I see myself in 5 years? That's a great question. I actually really love what I do right now. So I see myself still working in a similar role, but that doesn't mean that I don't have any room for improvement or don't want to see anything change within my realm or my professional career. So I guess where I see myself in 5 years is probably a similar position, but with a bigger scope of impact that spans the entire state, and new projects and interesting avenues of research and management for wildlife. Don't be afraid of the things that you think are hard. I was terrified of math when I was in high school, and even before high school, I was terrified of math. But actually, when I kind of buckled down and started learning more about it, I learned that I could do it, which was a really powerful thing for me. Um, so don't be afraid of those things that are scary. In fact, some of those things that are scary will probably make you grow more as a person, and perhaps in your professional career as well.